In war, no one comes back whole. Some return without a limb, others without the friend they swore to protect. But some come back, carrying only silence, and that weighs more than any rifle. This story begins with a scream in the mud, and a promise made seconds before everything turned to smoke. There are no heroes here, just a man who saw too much, lost too much, and lived too long trying to forget. So listen with your heart, and tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching this from? I want to know how far this promise will go. I was neck-deep in mud, blood on my hands, and Tommy's body pressed up against mine. He was still breathing, barely, but breathing. Machine guns tearing the air on the other side of the field, grenades exploding just a few feet away. The rain mixed with the blood made everything feel unreal. But it wasn't. That was war. That was life. And that was death, too. My name is Walter Harris. I was born in 1926 in a small town in Ohio called Marion. These days, no one remembers the name of the street I grew up on, but back then, every house had an American flag in the window and a crackling radio in the living room. We heard about the world through a stranger's voice, thinking all that madness was too far to ever reach us. But the world found us, and fast. When the war began, I was 15, still helping my father fix tractor belts in the fields, and my mother sew buttons onto shirts. I remember the first time I heard the name Hitler. Just sounded like some foreign nonsense to me. But over time, it turned into a shadow. And that shadow grew until it swallowed everything. I got my draft letter in the summer of 1943. I had just turned 17. I didn't volunteer, but I didn't run either. The letter came in the morning, folded neatly on the kitchen table. My mother already knew. She always knew things before I did. She looked at me like she'd already buried a part of me right there. My father drove me to the station. We didn't say much. At the end, he just said, "You'll come back, but you won't be the same." I thought he was being dramatic. Now I realized he was being kind. Training was in Texas, heat that could melt your thoughts, dust in your teeth, your nose, your ears. I learned how to take apart a rifle in under a minute, how to crawl through mud, how to dig a hole like you were digging your own grave, which sometimes you were. But the hardest thing I learned was how to hide the fear. Nobody ever said they were scared. But you could see it. You could see it in their eyes. You could see it in the way someone would flinch just hearing the sergeant's whistle. That's where I met Tommy Whitaker. He was from Missouri. Tall, skinny, always smiling. On day one, he came up to me and said, "If we don't die together, we're gonna live together. Deal?" Then he slapped my back. That son of a gun became my brother right then and there. We shared smokes, shared rations, shared silence, and later, we shared a promise. The crossing was by ship, 20 days at sea, 20 days of rocking, nausea, missing home, and letters we never sent. We landed in England first. Everything was gray. Gray sky, gray roads, gray walls, more training there. But it wasn't the same. It was like everyone already knew what was coming. Normandy, Omaha Beach, June 6, 1944. That date carved itself into my bones. I can't describe the sound I heard that morning. It was like the sky ripping apart. German machine guns wouldn't stop. The noise tore right through your chest. The sea was freezing. Every step I took felt like it was pulling my soul down. There was blood in the water, bodies floating, and no time to think, only to run or die. Me and Tommy ran for a hunk of twisted metal, maybe a blown-up tank. We threw ourselves behind it, gasping. That's when he looked at me different. His face was dirty, blood on his forehead, but his eyes were clear. "If I go down here, Walt, promise me you'll live for me." I thought he was joking. I said, "Shut up, Tommy. No one's going down." But he kept going. "Promise me, man. Go home. Find peace. Laugh. Live." I nodded. I promised. Thought it was just another trench talk. But that promise changed everything. We made it off that beach. Barely. But we did. And what came after was even worse. We marched across France. Every village, an ambush. Every forest, a trap. Every day, fewer names on the list. What war does to you, it doesn't just kill. It dries you out, turns your laugh into silence. I saw it in Tommy's eyes. And I saw it in mine, every time I caught my reflection in a puddle of mud. I didn't talk about this for years. Stayed quiet. Not even my wife knew half of it. Not my kids, because telling it means reliving it. And reliving it? That hurts. But now, at 97, I feel like I gotta get this out before it's too late. Before the memory goes with me. That night after the landing, we slept in what was left of a barn. rain dripping through holes in the roof. I was shivering, not from the cold, from what I'd seen. A piece of meat that used to be a man. A boy screaming for his mom with his last breath. The dry thud of a heart stopping next to me. That's when Tommy spoke again. He said if one of us went down, the other had to live for both. And again, I promised. I didn't know that promise would come due so soon. Death in war doesn't give you a warning. It's not dramatic like in the movies. Sometimes it's just a snap, a scream, a weight falling. We were pushing through a forest near Belgium, winter 1944, when Tommy ran ahead to cover our flank. I heard the shot. Just one. When I got to him, his eyes were still open, still warm, and for the first time he didn't smile. I dug the hole with my bare hands. In the frozen dirt. Alone. I laid him there, covered him, left a button from my jacket on his grave, and went back to the fight, like nothing happened. Because that's what war demanded. Keep walking, with half a soul. Now I'm here, sitting in this rocking chair, watching time drift by through the leaves outside. And sometimes I still smell that wet earth in the forest. I still see Tommy's eyes. I still hear him asking me to live. And I did live. I got married, had kids, worked in a garage for 40 years. But you know, even when life moves on, the past comes with you. I kept going. But I was never whole again. Now, at 97, I know that promise I made in the mud. That's what kept me standing. Promising to live is harder than you'd think, especially after you've seen so much death. And that's why I'm telling this now, because keeping it all to myself doesn't feel right anymore. This story isn't just mine. It's Tommy's too. It's everyone's, who never made it home. So listen with your heart, and then tell me, what part touched you the most, and where are you listening from? You never forget the smell of wet gunpowder, or the taste of stale water sitting at the bottom of a trench. After we made it off the beach, everything became mud, fear, and noise. But it was the silence. That silence between bombings. That scared me the most. That's when you heard the muffled crying, the prayers, the last breaths. That's when you heard your own mind whispering, "Am I next?" After Omaha, our unit pushed along the coast of France, clearing out occupied towns and making way for the Allied advance. At first we still wrote letters home. Our hands would shake, but hope was still alive. We lied in those letters, said we were eating well, sleeping even better, that it'd all be over soon. But the truth didn't fit inside an envelope. There were 12 of us in my original squad. Kids, really. The youngest was 17. He lied about his age to enlist. The oldest was 24, but he felt ancient next to us. I still remember all their names. Still remember the order they fell. Every death left a hole in us. We kept moving, but with less soul each day. One night, sleeping in a field near St. Lo, I woke up to a dry snap. A crack. Then, nothing. Jimmy, he'd been sleeping just 6 feet from me, took a sniper round, in the middle of the night. Never screamed, never woke up. Died with his eyes open, staring at the sky like he was seeing something the rest of us couldn't. I didn't cry. None of us did. Not because it didn't hurt, but because crying was a luxury out there. And because the crying came later. Alone inside your head, when your body finally gave up holding all that weight. Food was cold, canned rations. Water was sometimes from puddles filtered through dirty cloth. We had lice, rats, infection. Guys died without ever getting shot. A lot of them. Winter came early that year, and it came cruel. Bones ached like they were cracking from the inside. The cold got into your boots, your fingers, your chest, and still, we kept walking. There was one day, near the Belgian border, we marched 12 hours straight in total silence. The sergeant warned us, any noise could get us killed. 12 hours stepping over half-buried corpses. 12 hours with the smell of death stuck to our clothes. And right in the middle of that quiet march, some soldier behind me, barely knew him, started humming a lullaby. Soft, like he was holding on to sanity by a thread. That cut deeper than any explosion I'd ever heard. Tommy, he was always the light one, the joker, kept us laughing, told stories, did impressions of the officers. After he was gone, we turned to shadows. I kept breathing, kept moving, firing when ordered, obeying when called. But inside it was like I'd frozen, and everything I did was haunted by that promise. Live for me, he'd said. And out there, just surviving, was the hardest thing of all. One day, during an ambush on a narrow dirt road, I saw a German soldier surrendering. Couldn't have been older than me, hands in the air, shaking, no weapon. One of ours raised a rifle toward him. I looked at the kid. My finger was on my own trigger, but I didn't pull it. Not out of mercy, but because for a second I saw Tommy in his face. And I realized, killing someone who's already given up, that wasn't going to bring anyone back. That's what war does. It doesn't just take lives. It takes who you were before and replaces it with silence. A silence that never fully leaves. I got a fever late in '44. Pneumonia, bad. I barely made it through. The medic told me if it weren't for a letter I kept folded in my breast pocket, one Tommy had written me, just days before he died, I might not have pulled through. I read that letter every single day. Never told anyone what it said. Still won't. Because some pain doesn't belong to anyone else. Some pain you just carry. But in that letter, there was one line underlined in pencil. The war will end, Walt. Just don't let it keep going inside you. And I failed him there. Because it kept going. Still does. We spent Christmas in silence, deep in a frozen forest. No dinner. Just a chunk of hard bread and a cigarette split 3 ways. One guy asked me if I thought we'd make it out alive. I told him, I don't know if it matters. I just want to make it out with enough of myself left to remember. And that, enough of myself, became my goal. It wasn't about medals or glory or any of that crap. It was just that. Come back with what was left. For me, and for Tommy. But there was one night, a night that almost shattered all of that. And it was there, on a hill covered in snow, with the sound of wolves howling in the distance and the sky burning orange from the bombs, that I lost control. That night still visits me in pieces, not like a memory, but more like a wound that never really closed. I don't remember everything in order, and maybe that's a mercy, but I remember the cold, I remember the way my hands shook, and I remember the sound, just one sound, that pushed me over the edge. We were dug in near a hill outside Bastogne. It was late December, 1944. Snow had buried everything. Trees, trails, bodies. The Battle of the Bulge had already started, but we didn't know that's what it would be called. All we knew was we were surrounded, outgunned, and freezing. I hadn't slept in 3 days. Not real sleep. Just flashes. One eye open, finger near the trigger, waiting for something, anything, to move in the dark. The kind of sleep where your brain never shuts off, just keeps looping through things you don't want to see again. I hadn't eaten properly in days either. We were out of rations. One of the guys boiled snow with a bit of torn-up packaging just to have something warm. We were chewing on scraps, sharing whatever was left. I gave away my last chocolate bar to a kid named Murphy, who couldn't stop shaking. He died later that night. Shellfire. No scream. Just gone. But it wasn't Murphy that broke me. It was the singing. There was this soldier. New kid. Barely 19. He'd come in 2 weeks before. Quiet. Didn't talk much. Nobody really knew his name. That night, as we all sat in the dark, backs against frozen dirt, breathing into our collars just to keep our faces from burning in the wind, he started humming. Soft. Real soft. Like a lullaby. Just a few notes. I don't know why, but something inside me cracked. Like a glass under pressure. The kind of crack you don't hear until it's already broken all the way through. That sound. His voice. Fragile. Warm. Out of place in all that death. It reminded me I was still human. And that was too much. I stood up, didn't say anything, walked off into the snow. Nobody stopped me. I walked for maybe 20 minutes, rifle slung behind me, numb to the cold, not caring if a sniper was watching. Part of me hoped one was. I walked until my legs gave out and I dropped to my knees in a clearing. Just trees. Snow. Silence. And that's when I lost it. I screamed. Loud. Into the trees. Into the night. Not words, just noise. Pure, cracked open noise. I punched the snow, the dirt underneath, until my knuckles bled. I tore off my helmet, threw it as far as I could, then slammed my fists into the ground again and again. I shouted names of friends I'd buried, of friends I couldn't save. I cursed God. I cursed myself. I begged Tommy to forgive me. And when I ran out of rage, I cried. Not the kind of cry you can hide. Not a few tears down your cheek. I mean shaking, chest heaving, gut twisting crying. The kind that empties something out of you. Or maybe it just makes room for more. I didn't know how long I was out there. An hour, maybe more. When I finally stood up, my legs were numb. I found my helmet half buried in snow, put it back on like nothing happened, and walked back to camp. Nobody asked where I'd been. Nobody looked at me strange. Because they all knew. Maybe not the details, but they'd had their night too. Everyone breaks. Some sooner, some later. The only thing that matters is what you do after. From that night on, something changed in me. I stopped trying to pretend, stopped trying to carry every name on my back. I still remembered them, still do. But I let go of the guilt, or at least enough of it to keep moving. That was the night I realized, surviving isn't just not dying. It's choosing to keep walking when every part of you wants to stop. It's breathing through the weight, and carrying a promise even when you don't believe you can anymore. And that promise, it started to feel less like a burden, and more like a compass, a reason. But not long after that night, I would come face to face with something I never expected, something that made me question everything all over again. It was somewhere near the Siegfried line. I don't remember the exact town. We didn't even know what towns we were in half the time. Everything was mud and gray walls and roofs blown open like cracked skulls. We moved fast, clearing basements, barns, cellars, room by room, breath by breath. That morning, we'd lost 2 guys to a booby-trap door. They were just doing their job, standard sweep, and in a blink, they were gone. No warning, just a blast that shook the bricks out of the walls and left us blinking through dust and smoke. After that, we were more cautious, slower. The adrenaline keeps you moving, but the fear makes your hands sweat so bad you can barely keep your rifle steady. My boots were soaked through. My stomach was empty, my fingers were numb, my head wasn't really there anymore. It was like I was floating outside my own body, watching some version of me walk through the ruins with a gun in his hands and a war inside his chest. We kicked in the door of an old farmhouse. The wood was soft from rot, the hinges broken. It was quiet, that kind of quiet that makes your ears ring because the world's holding its breath. We cleared the first floor. Nothing. Just old furniture covered in dust and cobwebs. Plates still set on the table like someone had left in a hurry, years ago. Then we heard it. Movement. From upstairs. Soft. Barely a shuffle. I went up first, rifle ready. 1 step at a time. At the top of the stairs was a bedroom door, cracked open just enough. I pushed it with the barrel of my rifle. And that's when I saw him. A boy. Maybe 12, maybe 13. He was standing against the wall, hands raised, shaking like a leaf. Blonde hair, blue eyes, filthy clothes. Looked like he hadn't eaten in weeks. He was so thin I could count his ribs through the fabric. He wasn't holding a weapon, wasn't wearing a uniform, just a kid. And behind him, on the bed, was another boy. Younger, maybe 8, not moving, eyes closed, lips pale, dead or close to it. I froze. Everything in me stopped. I had seen bodies. Dozens. I'd stepped over dead children before. In burned-out villages, bombed train stations. I'd hardened myself to it, or at least I thought I had. But this wasn't a photo in the aftermath. This was a boy, right in front of me, breathing, crying, without making a sound. He looked at me like I was death himself. And maybe I was. My finger was on the trigger. That was habit by then. Training, survival. But I didn't move. And he didn't move either. The other guys came in behind me. One of them whispered, "Orders?" I didn't say anything. What was I supposed to say? Shoot a starving kid who never picked up a rifle? Take a prisoner we couldn't feed, couldn't move, couldn't protect? Leave him here to die like the one on the bed? There's no training for that. I looked at the boy. He looked back. And then slowly, he dropped to his knees, hands still in the air, like he was begging without words. That did it. I lowered my rifle, took off my helmet, reached into my coat pocket, and pulled out my last ration. A chocolate bar, half melted, broken in 2. I walked over, slowly, placed it on the floor in front of him. He didn't grab it right away, just stared, then looked at me again, like he couldn't believe I wasn't going to kill him. Finally, he took it, held it like it was a miracle, unwrapped the tiniest corner, and gave a bite to the boy on the bed. Still breathing? Barely, but alive. And I turned around, walked out of the room. No one said a word. We moved on to the next house, kept clearing, kept fighting, kept dying. But something in me shifted that day. I don't know what happened to those boys. I never saw them again. We moved out the next morning and the whole town was shelled 2 days later. But I think about them more than I want to admit, because that day reminded me I could still choose. Even in hell, I could still choose. I wasn't just a weapon. I wasn't just a number. I was still a man. And that scared me more than any bullet, because it meant I was still capable of feeling. And if you can feel, you can break. I carried that moment like a photograph in my mind. I never told anyone. Not my wife, not my kids, not the guys in my unit. Because war teaches you to bury what doesn't fit inside a medal. But even now, 97 years old, liver spots on my hands, eyes not what they used to be, I can still see his face, the boy with the raised hands. The boy who reminded me I was still human. And just when I thought I was beginning to hold myself together again, that's when the letter arrived, and everything started to unravel. The letter came wrapped in brown paper, folded into a tin ammo box that had been used for field mail, same kind we passed around in the mud, usually damp and smelling like rust. It was January 1945, and we had just pulled back from a forward position after days of holding a frozen ridge somewhere near the Luxembourg border. I was sitting on an overturned crate, trying to warm my hands near a fire that barely stayed lit in the snowstorm, when a runner from command handed me the box. "This came for you, Harris," he said, voice flat like everything else out there. I looked at it for a long while before opening it. No one sent me mail anymore. My folks had stopped writing after my last reply in November, the one where I told them, without really saying it, to stop expecting the same boy to come home. My younger brother was too young to write, and my girl, well, there was a girl once, had probably moved on long ago, so when I saw my name on that paper, scrawled in ink that had smudged from the cold, my hands went numb before I even touched it. Inside the box, under a folded field blanket and a small pack of cigarettes I didn't recognize, was the letter. Just one. Sealed in a worn envelope that looked like it had been through hell to get here, and written in handwriting I hadn't seen in over 6 months. Tommy's. I stared at it, held it in my lap for hours. I didn't speak, didn't eat. The snow came and went, melting on my helmet, and I just sat there like the world had stopped, because in a way, it had. That handwriting didn't lie. That was his, clear as day. He must have written it before the day he ran up that slope and took a bullet to the chest. Before I buried him in that forest with my hands frozen and shaking. Before the war took him from me. The envelope had no return address, just my name. Walt. No last name, no rank. Just like he always said it. I opened it slowly, afraid the paper would fall apart, and then I read. And I read again. It was short, barely a full page. But every word landed like a hammer. He started with a joke. Of course he did. "If this reaches you, it means you owe me $5. Then he went on. "I don't know if I'll make it through this, Walt. None of us really do, but if I don't, I need to ask you something." I could feel his voice as I read it, like he was sitting beside me in that trench again, throwing pebbles at a tin can. "Don't let what happens here decide who you are. We're going to do things, see things, that will never shake. You're going to make choices that haunt you. Me too. But don't let this war take your heart. Promise me you'll still find a way to be good. To be soft, even if the world gets hard." I stopped reading. My throat closed. I couldn't breathe for a second. Then I kept going. "You'll want to disappear when you get home. You'll think no one will understand. And they won't. But don't disappear. Tell someone. Even if it takes you 50 years. Don't carry it alone." At the bottom of the page, a line written in bigger letters, as if he pressed the pen harder. "Forgive yourself before it eats you alive." That was it. No goodbye. No signature, just that. I sat there all night, that letter clutched in my gloves like it was a life raft. And for the first time since I held his body in my arms, I cried without shame, not in secret, not alone. I wept in the open, surrounded by trees and snow and the smell of burned ration tins. And the others let me. Nobody mocked me, nobody turned away. One by one, they moved closer to the fire, said nothing, but sat with me. That letter became something I read every week after that, sometimes more. I folded it into my breast pocket and took it into battle like it was armor, but it didn't protect me from what came next. Because just days after I got that letter, we entered a village where we found something I still don't know how to describe. A barn, quiet, intact. No fire, no shell holes. Just a red-painted wooden door and frost on the windows. We heard movement inside, thought maybe it was German troops or civilians hiding. We kicked the door in and found 12 people inside, starving, filthy, terrified. They weren't Germans. They were Polish. Survivors from a work camp that had been abandoned weeks before. One woman was holding the hand of a man whose feet had been amputated. A girl, maybe 7, had her arms wrapped around the legs of a boy who looked half dead. They didn't speak English. We didn't speak Polish. But none of that mattered. They weren't the enemy. They were proof. Proof of what this war really was. Proof that what we'd been doing mattered, and I wanted so badly to believe it. But that night, as I lay staring at the ceiling beams of that same barn, trying to ignore the wheezing of a dying man 3 feet from me, I realized something I didn't want to admit. I didn't feel relief. I didn't feel victory. I didn't even feel pride. I felt hollow, like there was nothing left inside me big enough to carry hope. And that scared me, because Tommy had asked me to be soft, and all I felt was stone. That's what war does. It chips away at you, a little at a time, until you don't notice what's missing anymore, until one day you look in the mirror and see someone who survived everything, but can't remember how to live. And yet, despite all of that, I still had the letter. That piece of him that reminded me what it meant to care, to choose, to forgive, even if I hadn't yet, especially because I hadn't yet. I kept that letter until the end of the war, and long after. It sat in a box under my bed, next to medals I never showed anyone and photographs I couldn't throw away. And even now, at 97, when my hands shake and my memories start to blur, I still remember every word, every line, and I still wonder, why did it take a dead man to teach me how to live? I came back in April of 1946. They gave us a train ticket, a stale box lunch, and a pat on the back like we were supposed to just slide right back into life, like we'd been on vacation or something. I sat in that train car, staring out the window at the same country I left behind. But it didn't look the same anymore. It was cleaner, quieter, too quiet. When I stepped off the platform in Marion, Ohio, my mother was there, waiting. She hadn't changed much. Her hair had more gray, her eyes more worry, but she smiled when she saw me, and I did my best to return it. She hugged me, said, "My boy's home," and I stood there stiff, trying to let it feel real. My father was there too, behind her, more reserved, like always. He didn't say anything at first, just looked at me, nodded once, and shook my hand like we were sealing a business deal. That meant more than any speech. We rode home in silence, the three of us packed into that old truck, passing fields that used to feel like the whole world to me. Now they just looked small. When we got to the house, everything was just like I remembered it. The front steps still creaked, the kitchen still smelled like soap and black coffee, and the table had the same little crack in the wood from where my brother had once slammed a glass too hard, but I didn't feel like I belonged there. I sat in my old chair at dinner that night, trying to eat meatloaf and potatoes while my mother kept glancing at me like she was waiting for a story. My brother, now taller than me, with a mustache he was too proud of, asked if I'd killed a Nazi. I just looked down at my plate. I didn't want to lie, and I couldn't tell the truth. My father changed the subject, talked about the price of feed going up. I was grateful. That night I couldn't sleep. The bed was too soft, the silence too loud. I kept reaching for a rifle that wasn't there, kept thinking the walls would shake from shell fire any second. I got up around 3 in the morning and sat on the porch, just me and the crickets. My mother came out a few minutes later. She didn't say anything, just brought me a blanket and sat beside me. I think she understood more than anyone. She didn't ask questions, just let me sit there in the dark, my breath fogging up the night air, trying to feel something again. Over the next few weeks, everyone treated me like I was supposed to be celebrating. Neighbors dropped by, folks brought pies. They called me hero and the brave one, and said things like, "Must be good to be home." I nodded, smiled when I could, said thank you more times than I can count. But I didn't feel like a hero. I felt like a ghost wearing my own skin. I tried to work with my father again, fixing tractors like before. My hands remembered what to do, but my head was somewhere else. Loud noises made me flinch. The smell of oil sometimes reminded me of burned tanks. One day, a tire popped in the shop, and I hit the ground before I even knew why. Everyone stared. I said it was nothing, got up, washed the grease off, went home early. I stopped going out after that. I'd walk to town sometimes, but the crowds made me nervous. Too many faces, too many voices, and all I could think about was how many people I'd seen fall in the mud, never to speak again. How unfair it was that I could buy a soda at the corner store while Tommy rotted in the ground. Guilt isn't loud. It's not dramatic. It's a quiet hand that squeezes your chest when you least expect it. It follows you into every conversation, into every laugh, into every silent moment when you look at your reflection and wonder who the hell is looking back. I tried to date a girl someone introduced me to. Nice girl. Sweet voice. She wore a yellow dress and smelled like lilacs. We went for a walk near the creek, and she asked me what France was like. I said, wet. She laughed. I didn't. She asked if I ever wrote poetry or played an instrument. I said I used to whistle. That was the last time we saw each other. I couldn't fake it. I couldn't pretend to be normal. So I stopped trying. The worst part was church. Everyone smiling, shaking hands, saying, "God brought you home for a reason." I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask why he didn't bring the others. Why did Jimmy have to die with his eyes open in the mud? Why did that German boy have to feed his dying brother with a melting chocolate bar in silence? Why did Tommy bleed out in my arms while the sky lit up with gunfire? I stopped going. Couldn't sit through the hymns. Couldn't hear the word peace without choking on it. I started walking a lot. Out past the town limits, down long roads no one used anymore. I'd walk until my legs ached, until my head was clear enough to breathe. I started writing too, just thoughts, lines, memories, not for anyone else, just to get them out of my head. I kept Tommy's letter in my pocket the whole time, read it when things got too heavy, read it when I forgot why I was still trying. Don't carry it alone, he'd written. But I didn't know how to share it with anyone. I didn't have the words. I didn't have the right. I had survived. That was the cruel part. I had lived, and every day I woke up trying to figure out what that meant, trying to make it worth it, trying to forgive myself enough to keep breathing. I told myself I would talk. One day, when I had the strength, when I had the right moment. But the days kept passing, and the silence just became part of me, like another scar, invisible but deep. And then, one afternoon, almost a year later, I heard someone knock on the door. I opened it, and the past came walking in, wearing a uniform I hadn't seen in months, carrying something I never thought I'd see again. I wasn't expecting anyone that afternoon. It was late spring, sun slanting through the porch rail, and I was sanding down a piece of wood out back, something to keep my hands busy and my mind quieter. Then I heard the knock. Steady, not hurried. 3 times. I wiped my hands on my jeans, walked around the side of the house, opened the front door, and nearly lost my breath. At first I didn't recognize him. He looked older, more drawn, thinner around the face, but the eyes, that same storm-gray stare, hit me like a punch to the chest. It was Alan Davies, Private Alan Davies, from my squad, one of the only ones who'd made it out. The last time I saw him was in a makeshift field hospital outside Bastogne, his leg torn open from shrapnel, screaming while they tried to stop the bleeding. I thought he was gone. He wasn't supposed to be standing on my porch. He wasn't supposed to be alive. I opened the screen door, said his name without thinking. He smiled, barely, and said, "Hey, Walt." We stood there like statues for a second. Then I stepped aside, and he came in like it was still 1944, and we were hiding from mortars. We sat at the kitchen table. I poured coffee. Neither of us drank it. For a long time, we didn't speak. We just stared at the old wood grain of the table, the same table where I'd eaten with my family as a boy, where nothing ever felt right anymore. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small metal tin. Rusted, dented, familiar. I knew it instantly. It was Tommy's. His ration tin? The one he used to keep spare bullets in? Matches, a photo of his sister. I swallowed hard. Alan said, "I've been meaning to give this to you. Took me a long time to find you." I took the tin in both hands. It was cold, heavy. Inside, everything was still there. The matches, worn flat. The photo faded and creased. A button from Tommy's jacket. A strip of fabric torn from a sleeve, stained with blood. And a folded piece of paper. My name was on it, just like the letter I got months ago. But this one was different. I didn't open it right away. Couldn't. My hands shook too much. Alan said, "He gave it to me the night before we pushed into that forest. Said if anything happened to him, you'd know what to do." He paused, looked down at the mug. "I didn't make it back to him in time." "You did?" I nodded. It hurt to remember that night. The smell of pine and blood and gunpowder. The sound of Tommy gasping for breath while I pressed my hands against his chest. Alan cleared his throat, said, "I heard what happened, after, what you did, how you buried him." I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. Then he leaned in and said something I wasn't ready for. "Walt, he talked about you all the time. Said you were the only reason he kept going. He didn't just make that promise to you. He made it about you." I felt the breath leave my chest. I had carried Tommy's words like a weight, like a burden I could never fulfill. I had spent every day since the war trying to be worthy of surviving when he hadn't. And now here was someone telling me that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't a debt I owed, but a gift I'd been given. I opened the second letter that night. I waited until Alan left. He didn't stay long, just enough time to say what he came to say. He'd moved out west, was working on a farm, said it helped him sleep, said sometimes he still woke up hearing the whistle of a shell that wasn't coming. I knew that feeling. I stood on the porch after he drove off, holding the letter like it might burn through my fingers. Then I went inside, sat down alone, and read. Tommy's words were different this time, less serious. He wrote like he was trying to talk me down from a ledge he knew I'd be standing on. "If you're reading this, then it means we messed something up," he wrote. "Or fate did. Either way, I'm sorry. I know this is going to hurt like hell." He went on to tell me not to let the war turn me into something I'm not. He said I was the kind of man people trusted without knowing why. Said I had a way of making others feel safe, even when I didn't feel safe myself. Said he admired that. "You always thought I was the brave one," he wrote. "But I was only brave because you were there. And if you're still there, then be there. For someone else. For you. Don't waste what I couldn't finish." I don't know how long I sat at that table. Hours, maybe. Long after the sky turned dark and the house went silent. I reread that letter over and over until the words blurred together. And somewhere in the middle of it, I realized I'd never cried for myself. I'd cried for the ones I lost, cried for the dead, for the broken, for the boy I used to be. But I'd never let myself mourn the man I became, the one who lived. And that night, I did. Not because I was weak, but because I finally understood what Tommy had been trying to tell me all along. That surviving wasn't enough. That I had to live, really live, with all the pain, with all the memory, with all the silence, but also with choice. That was the start of something. Not healing. Not yet. But honesty. I started writing more. I started talking, a little, when people asked. I started letting the past be part of me, not all of me. And I kept both of Tommy's letters. One in my pocket, one in the tin, because some promises are too big to be carried in silence, and some friendships don't end at the grave. After Alan's visit, something shifted. Not like a door flung open, more like a window cracked just enough to let in air I hadn't realized I was starving for. I didn't wake up one day magically lighter. Didn't feel the weight of war lift off my shoulders all at once, but the silence inside me started to echo a little less. I still walked alone, still had nights where the past came crashing in like a freight train I couldn't outrun, but for the first time, I didn't fight it. I let the memories come, let the faces return. I stopped pretending I didn't remember their names. I stopped numbing myself to the sound of my own thoughts. I started small. I went back to the garage with my father, just once a week at first. My hands still knew how to twist a wrench, how to find the rhythm of a machine, and there was something quieting in that work. No metals, no uniforms, just gears and grease, and the hum of something broken learning how to work again. My father never asked what happened over there. I think he knew I couldn't answer. But sometimes he'd hand me a tool and look me in the eye a little longer than needed. That was enough. I began writing every morning, before the town stirred awake. Just me, the smell of coffee, and a pencil. I wrote about the forest, about Tommy, about the chocolate bar I gave that boy, about what it felt like to hear singing in the snow. I didn't write for anyone else. I wrote to keep from drowning. My mother noticed the change first. She didn't say it, but she started humming in the kitchen again, like she used to when I was a boy. I think she heard me humming too sometimes, without meaning to. One Sunday, I walked to church again. Not because I suddenly believed God had a reason for everything, but because I wanted to see if I could sit in a pew and not run out the door. I stayed the whole time. I didn't sing, didn't take communion, but I stayed. And when the pastor spoke about carrying burdens too heavy for one man, I felt something in my chest unclench just a little. People in town stopped calling me hero. I think they saw it didn't fit. I appreciated that. They started treating me like a person again, not a symbol. That helped. One day, I found the courage to visit Tommy's parents. I hadn't seen them since before we shipped out. Their house was still painted white, with the porch swing that creaked when you sat too hard. I stood on the walkway for 15 minutes before I knocked. His mother opened the door, and the look on her face said she knew exactly who I was, even after all that time. She didn't cry. She just reached out, touched my face gently, and said, "Thank you for bringing him home in your heart." We sat in their living room, quiet at first, then talking like no time had passed. I told them what they needed to know. Not the gore, not the fear, but the truth. That Tommy was brave, that he was kind, that he made us laugh even when we thought we couldn't. I gave them the button I'd taken from his coat, the one I'd carried in my pocket for over a year. His father said nothing the whole time, but as I got up to leave, he shook my hand with both of his, and in that grip, I felt everything he couldn't say. After that, I didn't stop talking entirely. I didn't tell everyone everything, but I told enough. Enough to keep breathing. I started helping at the local school, fixing bikes for the kids who couldn't afford new ones. It felt good to work with small things, to fix what could be fixed. One boy, Charlie, asked me if I'd ever been in the war. I nodded. He asked if I'd killed anyone. I paused, then said, yes. And I saved someone too. He didn't ask anything else, just handed me a broken chain and asked if I could fix it. And I did. That night, I read Tommy's letter again. Not because I was sad, but because I wanted to remember his voice on a good day. I didn't cry. I smiled. I looked at his handwriting and remembered how he used to hum while cleaning his rifle, how he always said, "See you tomorrow," even when we both knew tomorrow wasn't promised. I looked out the window that night and didn't feel like a ghost. I felt like a man trying, a man learning how to be here again. I knew I'd never be the same, knew the war had carved out a part of me that would never grow back. But I also knew this. Living with the memory is different than living in it. And slowly, I was learning how to do the first without drowning in the second. Some mornings, I still wake up with the weight of it all pressing on my chest. But now, I get up anyway. I make the coffee. I breathe through it. I go to the garage. I walk the long roads. And I try to be someone that Tommy would have smiled at. That I could be proud of, too. Not a hero. Just a man keeping a promise. One day at a time. It happened in the most ordinary way, as these things always do, not in a parade or on some anniversary, but on a Tuesday, over a loose spark plug at the back of the garage, where I'd been helping out part-time again, mostly to stay moving, to stay useful. A kid, college age, thin, sleeves rolled up like he was trying to prove something, had come in needing help with his old pickup. I showed him how to clean out the distributor cap, handed him the right wrench, and watched as he tried, failed, tried again, and finally smiled when the engine gave a cough and turned over. It should have been nothing, just another small job. But when he looked up at me, grease on his forehead, eyes squinting through sunlight, he paused and said, "Are you Walter Harris?" I nodded, wiping my hands on a rag. He looked nervous, then said, "My grandfather told me about you." That stopped me cold. My mind flipped through every name, every face. "Your grandfather?" I asked. He nodded. "Yannick Sobel. He said you gave him chocolate once. In Germany, during the war." I blinked. My hands went still. My chest tightened. And suddenly, I was back in that room. The upstairs of a rotted-out farmhouse. A boy kneeling on the floor with his hands raised. A second boy unconscious on the bed behind him. The air thick with fear and rot and silence. That boy had been Polish. And now, standing in front of me, was a young man with the same shape to his face, the same slope to his shoulders. "He's alive?" I asked, the words barely audible. The kid smiled, nodded. 92. He lives in Pittsburgh now. Told me to look for you if I ever came through Ohio. Said he never forgot." I had to sit down. The bench creaked under me. My throat was dry. For decades, I had carried that moment like a question without an answer. I had no way of knowing what happened to them after we pulled out, after the shelling began, after the village was gone. I had told myself they probably didn't make it, had prepared for that truth, buried it the way we buried everything back then. But now here he was, his grandson, alive, real, talking to me like I was more than a name in a story passed around a dinner table. I didn't know what to say. I didn't even know how to feel. Relief, maybe. Gratitude. But mostly, weight. A weight I didn't realize I'd been holding, suddenly lifting all at once. The kid said, "He said he never forgot the way you looked at him, that you saw him." That hit harder than anything, because that was it. I hadn't done anything heroic. I didn't carry him out of a burning building. I didn't take a bullet for him. I just didn't pull the trigger. I just saw him. As a person. As a scared child in the middle of something he didn't ask for. And for him, that was enough to remember me by. That night, I went home and sat in the kitchen staring at the photo of Tommy I'd kept above the sink for years. I poured myself a small glass of whiskey. Not much, just enough to feel warm. And I whispered, "They made it, Tom." I don't know if he heard. I like to think he did, because something settled in me that night. Something quiet, like a last puzzle piece finally pressed into place. I had spent most of my life wondering whether anything I did over there had made a difference, whether surviving had meant anything, whether the promise I made had been enough. And now, I knew. One act of mercy. One choice to listen to your gut instead of your fear. One moment of humanity in the middle of hell. That's what made it through. That's what survived. And that was something I could live with. A few weeks later, the young man sent me a letter. Inside was a photograph of his grandfather, sitting in a chair with a thick wool blanket over his knees, smiling at the camera, holding a bar of chocolate in one hand. Not the same bar, obviously, just a symbol. But the look in his eyes said everything. And there, folded behind the photo, was a note. He says thank you, for seeing him, for not forgetting. I sat with that letter a long time. I didn't cry, not this time. I just let the feeling settle. And then, slowly, I got up, walked out to the porch, and sat in my rocking chair as the sun went down over the fields. And for the first time in years, I felt like the silence inside me wasn't closing in. It was stretching out, making space, making room for something else, something that had been missing for a long, long time. Peace? Maybe not, but something close enough. And it all started with a boy, a piece of chocolate, and a choice I never thought would matter again. Funny how the past finds its way back to you. Sometimes through pain, sometimes through memory, and sometimes through the voice of someone who just wants to say, "You mattered." People think survival means you made it out alive, that you walked away, got lucky, found your way home, and left the rest behind. But what no one tells you is that sometimes survival hurts more than death ever could. Because when you survive, you carry. You carry names. You carry sounds. You carry images burned into the back of your eyes that no light can reach. You carry what you saw, what you did, and what you failed to do. I've been carrying things for over 70 years. Some I buried deep. Some I wore like armor. Some I only admitted to myself when the house was dark and the radio had gone quiet. But here's what I've learned, and it took me a lifetime to get here. Some of it, you have to let go. Not because you forget, not because it stops hurting, but because holding it too tight keeps you from holding anything else. And life, if it teaches you anything, it teaches you that the most painful things are also the most important ones to speak. I spent years running from my own memories, years pretending that silence was strength, that being quiet made me brave. But the truth is, silence is a kind of death, too. The day I finally told someone about Tommy, about the letter, about the boy with the chocolate, I didn't become a different man. But I became a real one again. I became someone who could breathe, even with the ache still in my chest. There's a reason I've told you all this now. Not because I want a medal, not because I need pity. I'm 97 years old. I've outlived most of the people I ever loved. But I still have my memory, and I still believe in one thing. The story matters. Not the story of the war, the story of the man who came home from it, the story of what he did with what he saw, the story of how he chose again and again to keep living. People always ask me, how did you get through it? And the truth is, some days I didn't. Some days I was just a body in motion, but other days I remembered the promise, that muddy trench, that voice. Live for me. That's what brought me home. That's what kept me here. And that's what I tell any young person who thinks they're too broken to begin again. You're not. You're tired. You're hurting. But you're still here. And as long as you're here, you can choose what to carry. I've chosen to carry kindness, mercy, and memory. Not because I'm good, but because I've seen what happens when men forget they're still human. I've written this not just to tell my story, but to remind you that some wounds never close, but they don't have to keep bleeding forever. You can learn to walk with them. And sometimes, if you're lucky, someone comes along and tells you that you mattered. And that's enough. So that's it. That's the truth of what I lived, of what I survived. Not the war, but what came after. And if you're still listening, thank you. For sitting with it. For carrying it with me, even for a little while. Because now, maybe, it's just a little bit lighter. Surviving, my friend, sometimes hurts more than fighting, but it's worth it. Every step, every breath, every quiet, painful, beautiful moment after. So now, I'll ask you one last thing. What did this story make you feel? Tell me, what part stayed with you the most? And where in the world are you listening from? Because I may be an old man on a porch with more years behind than ahead, but I'm still listening.